So picture this. It's a Tuesday or, Thursday. You're driving home, listening to a podcast, maybe even this one, thinking about what's in the fridge for dinner.
Just a normal day.
A totally normal day. You are completely in your bubble. Your biggest worry is whether traffic is going to add 10 minutes to your commute. And then physics happens.
In a literal blink of an eye.
Exactly. Metal crunches. Glass shatters. Maybe the airbag deploys with that punch to the face and the smell of burnt gunpowder. In 1 second, your reality shifts. You go from relaxed commuter to accident victim. It is chaotic, it is loud, and then it's dangerously silent.
It's the most adrenaline-soaked moment most people will experience in a standard year. And here's the problem. Your brain. It is not helping you.
Not at all.
It's dumping cortisol. It's screaming fight or flight. It is absolutely not thinking about civil liability statutes, insurance subrogation, or, traffic engineering.
Which is exactly why we are doing this deep dive today. We're looking at a comprehensive safety guide called Know When and Why to Stop After an Accident. And I want to be clear right off the top. This isn't just about being a good citizen or following the rules. This is about survival.
It really is. We're talking about financial survival, legal survival, and literal physical survival.
Yeah.
Because the decisions you make in that brain-fogged, shaky-handed state right after the crash, they stick with you for months, maybe even years.
So our mission today is to really unpack those critical first 5 minutes. We're going to look at the legal mandates, the stuff that keeps you out of handcuffs, but we're also going to look at some really specific tactical advice.
The vehicle positioning stuff.
Exactly, the positioning. It's fascinating. It's all about knowing where to put your car so you don't turn a bad day into an absolute tragedy.
Yeah.
And we'll cover the exception, because sometimes stopping is actually the dangerous choice.
And that's the big question the source poses to us, right? When the adrenaline hits, do you actually know how to override your panic and balance safety, the law, and self-preservation?
Because they often feel like they're fighting each other.
They really do.
Okay, so let's walk through this chronologically. The crash just happened. The noise has stopped. The car is either moving or it's stopped. What is the absolute first conceptual pillar we need to get our heads around?
The why. Why are we stopping? And look, I know everyone listening thinks, well, obviously I stopped because I'm not a criminal. But the source makes a really critical distinction here about the legal obligation.
You're right. It's not just don't run away. It's deeper than that.
Correct. In almost every jurisdiction, the requirement to stop is triggered by the event, not the severity of the event.
So it doesn't matter how bad the crash was.
Not at all. The source is very specific. Compliance is non-negotiable, regardless of whether it's a total wreck with smoke pouring out or just a minor love tap in bumper-to-bumper traffic.
I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up. They think, oh, there's no damage. The other guy waved at me. I can just keep going.
And that is a dangerous, dangerous assumption. If you drive away and that other driver later claims they have whiplash or they find a scratch they say you caused,
You're in trouble.
you have now left the scene of an accident. You've taken a civil insurance issue, a hassle, and potentially upgraded it to a criminal offense.
We're talking about hit and run statutes here.
Exactly. And the penalties listed in the source are severe. We are not talking about a speeding ticket where you pay $50 and move on.
No.
We're talking about heavy fines, mandatory license suspension, and, yes, even imprisonment. The act of leaving implies guilt. It implies an attempt to evade responsibility.
So by stopping, you're protecting yourself.
You're immunizing yourself against that presumption of guilt. It's your first layer of legal defense.
Okay, so stopping protects your freedom. But once you do stop, there is a specific kind of administrative dance you have to do, the exchange.
Right. The mandatory data dump. Name, contact, insurance. But the source brings up a really interesting moral dimension here that goes beyond just swapping papers.
Yeah, caught that. It talked about the human element.
It's like the bystander effect in reverse. When you stop, you become the first responder. You are the only person on Earth in that specific moment who can assess if someone is hurt. The source emphasizes that offering aid, even if it's just dialing 911 because the other driver is unconscious, can mitigate injury severity. You're stopping to ensure human safety, not just to save your insurance premium.
Okay, but speaking of premiums, though, let's be cynical for a second. We have listeners who are pragmatic. How does stopping protect your wallet? Because my instinct says run away and my rates won't go up.
There's a total fallacy. This is the financial and factual protection pillar, and this is crucial. The source explains that most insurance policies have a clause requiring a police report for any significant claims.
No stop, no report.
No stop, no report, and no report. Good luck proving you weren't at fault.
It just becomes a he said, she said situation.
And in a he said, she said, where one person stayed and the other one drove off, who do you think the police and the insurance adjusters are going to believe?
The one who stayed. Every time.
Every single time. The source calls this preventing false narratives. This is the narrative war. If you leave, the other driver controls the story. They can say, he was speeding, he was swerving, he looked drunk. You are not there to refute it.
But by stopping, you freeze the facts.
And you collect the receipts. Exactly. You take photos of the scene, you get witness contacts before they drive away, you lock down the truth. You are building the evidence package that your insurance company will use to defend you.
Okay, so we're sold, we are stopping, we are not running, we're legally and morally obligated. But now we get into the physics of it. We're in a 3,000-pound metal box, possibly on a highway where other metal boxes are doing 70 miles an hour.
This is the where. And honestly, this section of the guide was the most eye-opening for me because stopping sounds static, right?
Yeah, you just hit the brakes.
But it's not. It's actually a dynamic tactical decision.
The source talks about the secondary collision. Can you define that? Because that sounds worse than the first one.
Oh, it often is. The secondary collision is the absolute nightmare scenario. You survive the initial crash. Maybe you just rear-ended someone. You're fine. But you stop dead in the middle of the lane.
Okay.
And 30 seconds later, a distracted driver or a semi-truck plows into your stationary car because they didn't see you in time.
And because you're stopped, you just absorbed all of that energy.
Exactly. That second crash is frequently more lethal than the first because you are a sitting duck.
So how do we assess where to put the car? Because I see people all the time who get into a minor fender bender in the middle lane of the interstate, and they just sit there.
And get out and start pointing at bumpers.
While traffic is whizzing by at 80 miles an hour.
Which is, I mean, it's suicidal behavior.
Mm-hmm.
To assess this, you have to run a split-second algorithm. Is it minor or major? And the source gives us a great heuristic. If you can steer it, clear it.
If you can steer it, clear it. I like that. So if the engine runs and the wheels turn, get off the road.
Immediately. Do not stop in the passing lane to inspect a bumper scratch. The source is adamant about this. You need to move out of the flow of traffic. Aim for the shoulder, or, ideally, a nearby parking lot. Get completely off the roadway.
Okay, but I know what some people are thinking. If I move the car, the police won't see how the accident happened. I'm destroying the evidence.
I hear that all the time. But listen, the police are experts at accident reconstruction. They can tell what happened from the damage and the skid marks. They would much rather you move the cars to safety than keep the highway blocked and cause a 10-car pileup.
Safety trumps CSI.
Every single time.
But what if you can't move it? What if the axle is snapped or someone is hurt?
Then the logic completely flips. If there are injuries or the car is mechanically dead, you stay put. You do not try to push a wrecked car across a highway. That's how pedestrians get killed.
You leave it.
You leave the vehicle where it is and wait for emergency services.
There was a specific point about visibility hazards that I think is really easy to forget in the moment. The geography of the road.
Geography is your enemy here. The source warns against stopping just over the crest of a hill or around a blind bend.
Right, because you're setting a trap.
You are. Oncoming traffic sees empty road, they come over the hill at 60, and boom, there you are.
So even if your car is damaged, if it can move at all, you kind of limp it forward until you're on a straightaway where people can see you?
Yes. You need sight lines.
Mm-hmm.
You want drivers to see you from 200, 300 feet away so they have time to brake.
Okay, let's distinguish between environments. The source separates urban from rural, and the advice for the city seemed, well, it goes against every instinct I have.
You're talking about the stay inside rule for city driving.
Right. You're in downtown traffic, a busy ring road, you get hit. The source says, do not get out.
Think about the environment. You have 3, maybe 4 lanes of aggressive, high-density traffic.
Yeah.
There is no shoulder.
None.
If you get out to look at your taillight, you are standing in a slaughter zone. You are a soft biological target in a machine world.
But people are honking. You feel like you're blocking the entire world. The pressure to get out and do something is so intense.
Let them honk. The source is very clear. Your social embarrassment is not worth your life. The car offers protection. It's a steel cage.
Stay in the cage.
Stay in the cage. Keep your seatbelt on. We'll get to that in a second. And wait for police to secure the lane.
Okay, let's flip the script. Rural road. It's dark. You're in the middle of nowhere.
Totally different threat profile. Now, the threat isn't density, it's invisibility. The source suggests prioritizing light. If you can, limp the car to a street light, a gas station, a farm entrance, anything that breaks the darkness. Being a dark object on a dark road is a recipe for being struck by a logging truck that simply never saw you.
So location isn't just stopped, it's stopped strategically.
Correct. You are positioning yourself to be seen and to be avoided. You have to think like a traffic engineer for 5 minutes.
Let's move to the how. We have found our spot, or we're stuck in our spot. How do we conduct ourselves? The source talks about signaling.
Immediate action. Hazard lights. The four-way flashers. It seems so obvious, but panic makes us forget the basics. You need to communicate to the entire ecosystem that you are now a hazard.
That you're a static object in a dynamic world.
Perfectly put.
And what about warning triangles? I have a kit in my trunk, but honestly, I don't know if I've ever opened it.
If you are in a safe position to deploy them, and I mean, you aren't walking into traffic to do it, they're incredibly effective. But the source notes that most people put them way too close.
Right, like 5 feet behind the car.
Yeah, which does nothing. It's too late by the time they see it. You need to pace it back 50 feet, 100 feet, give other drivers time to process the warning and react. But again, only if you are not putting yourself in danger by walking down the road.
Okay, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the seatbelt rule. You said if we stay in the car, like in that urban scenario, we keep the belt on.
This is a critical insight that I think 90% of drivers would get wrong.
I know I would.
The crash is over. You're stopped. Your adrenaline is dumping. Your instinct is to unbuckle, take a deep breath, maybe turn around to check the kids or reach for your phone.
Right, you want to move. You want to assess your body.
The source says, don't. Keep that belt click tight. Why? Because of that secondary collision we talked about.
The rear end impact.
Imagine you were sitting there, unbuckled, and a car hits you from behind at 40 miles per hour. Without a seatbelt, you're going to be thrown into the dashboard, the windshield.
Oh, no.
The car's safety systems, the airbags, the pretensioners, they rely on you being buckled to work properly.
That's a terrifying image, but it makes perfect sense. You're basically assuming the crash isn't over yet.
You are still in the danger zone until the police arrive with flashing blue lights to divert traffic. Until then, you are strapped in, ready for another impact. It's about maintaining a defensive posture even when you aren't moving.
So if we do decide to exit, say we made it to a parking lot, how do we do that safely?
With extreme paranoia. The source advises the swivel head. You never turn your back on the road. You check, you exit, and you get away from the vehicle.
Not just next to it.
No. If there's a guardrail, get behind it.
Yeah.
If there's an embankment, get up on it. And do not stand between the two cars exchanging insurance info.
Right, the crush zone.
Never stand between the cars. If a third car hits the pile, you're caught in the middle. You want to be completely out of the line of fire.
Okay, this has all been very, standard accidents happen advice. But the deep dive took a turn into something a bit darker. The gut check.
Yeah. This is the exception that proves the rule.
Yeah.
And I'm glad the source included it because it addresses the reality of the world we live in.
We're talking about intentional collision.
It sounds like Hollywood fiction, but it happens. Pumpkin Rob. Carjackings initiated by a minor rear-end tap. The source acknowledges that not every collision is accidental.
So how do you know? What are the signs?
It's usually contextual. Is it a desolate area? Was the tap incredibly minor? But the other car is stopping aggressively. Are there multiple people in the other car looking at you? Does the situation just feel wrong?
And if your internal alarm bells start ringing, if the hair on the back of your neck stands up?
Then you engage in what the source calls strategic noncompliance.
Strategic noncompliance. I like the sound of that.
It's so important. I mean, we just spent 10 minutes saying, you must stop or you go to jail. But the source clarifies, if you genuinely fear for your safety, do not stop right there.
So what do you do? Because you can't just drive home and hide under the cover.
No, that's fleeing. Instead, you drive immediately to the nearest police station or a highly public, well-lit area with cameras like a busy gas station or a fire station.
You're moving the venue.
Exactly. You were still complying with the intent of the law. You're reporting the accident,
right,
but you were dictating the terms of your safety. You're saying, I will exchange information, but I will do it where I know I am safe.
And what if your car is wrecked and you can't drive away? You're trapped.
Lock the doors. Roll up the windows. Do not engage with the other driver. Call 911 immediately and you explicitly tell the dispatcher, I have been hit, I do not feel safe, I am locking my doors until officers arrive.
That puts it on the record.
It establishes that you aren't being uncooperative, you are being protective. It validates your gut check. The source is clear. Your life is worth more than the procedural politeness of rolling down your window to talk to a stranger who gives you a bad vibe.
That's a powerful takeaway. Trusting your instinct over social pressure. We are so conditioned to be polite, to say sorry, to follow the script.
Always trust the gut. It's an ancient survival mechanism. Use it.
So looking back at all this, we've covered the legal mandate, the physics of positioning, the conduct at the scene, and even this criminal element. It's a lot more than just pull over and call your dad.
It really is. And if we zoom out, I think the source is giving us a framework to regain control. A crash is fundamentally a loss of control.
Yeah.
Physics took over. You were a passenger in your own life for a few seconds.
Yeah. That's a scary feeling. It's vulnerability.
It is. But everything we just discussed, the decision to stop, the choice of where to park, the discipline to stay buckled, the evidence collection, that is you taking the control back.
You're switching from victim to scene commander.
Exactly. You become the manager of the situation. You are balancing those three pillars we mentioned. Stopping for the law, stopping for safety, and stopping for the truth.
Stopping for the truth. That's the evidence part.
Right. Ensuring the narrative is accurate, protecting yourself financially, making sure the reality of what happened is what ends up on that piece of paper.
It's funny, we spend so much time worrying about the driving part of driving, staying in the lane, watching the speed limit, checking mirrors, but we rarely practice the crashing part. We don't rehearse the worst-case scenario.
And that leads me to the provocative thought I wanted to leave with the listeners.
Lay it on us.
We live in an age of total distraction. We're in our pods, listening to deep dives, on the phone, dictating texts. We are insulated from the physical world, but the road is a hostile environment. So the question is, are you mentally agile enough to switch roles instantly?
What do you mean by that?
Can you go from relaxed commuter thinking about dinner to tactical first responder in the blink of an eye? Because that is what a crash demands. It demands that you suppress the panic, suppress the urge to run, and execute a cold, logical protocol.
That's a heavy question. I'd like to think the answer is yes, but without a plan, maybe not.
And that's why we do these deep dives.
Yeah.
To give you the plan so you don't have to invent one while your ears are still ringing and your hands are shaking.
Well, I know I'm going to be scanning the shoulder a little differently on my way home today. I'm going to look at those guardrails and think about my out. Hopefully you never have to use any of this, but if that crunch ever happens, now you know exactly what to do.
Better to have the plan and not need it than need it and not have it.
Absolutely. Eyes on the road, everyone. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Stay safe.
Please like, subscribe, and get notified.